In this lesson, we're going to talk about one of my favorite features of Fast API, and that is the built-in support for documentation. So normally when you build an API, you're going to want to create documentation so that users know how to use it. And one of the challenges with that is that it's not exactly a simple process, and anytime you make changes to your API, you have to make sure that you update your documentation, and it's very easy to forget to do that. With Fast API, Fast API automatically generates the documentation based off of the path operations that you've defined. So it does it all for you, and you don't have to write a single piece of code to actually get the documentation in place. And so to actually see the documentation, you just go to the normal URL, but you just do /docs. And so this is going to show you the built-in documentation powered by Swagger UI. And so what's really nice is, and if you've ever looked at the documentation for some other APIs, you may have noticed something that looks similar to this, and that usually means that they used Swagger UI as well. So Fast API has built-in Swagger UI support, and it automatically generates all of the routes and the documentation for all of your paths. And so if you take a look at all of our operations, our path operations, we've got the one for getting all posts. We've got the one for creating posts. We've got the one for getting an individual post. We've got the one for updating an individual post as well as deleting a post. And what's really cool about this is if we do hit the drop down, right, it's going to show you how to use this specific path. Or how to use this specific API endpoint. So if you want to actually try it out, you can do that. So you could say try it out, and then you can just hit execute. Right? And so now it actually ran the query against our API server, and it shows us what the output is. So these are the two documents that we have, or the two posts that we've created. And we can do this with all of the API endpoints. So if we want to create a new post, it's going to give you an example of the data that we can pass in. So we can try it out. And then it's going to give us all the fields that we have to pass in, and then we can just customize this. So if I want to say creating new post with documents, and then I'll just for content, I'll say this is really cool. We'll give it a random rating. We hit execute, right? It actually runs that. It's going to show you how to perform the same actions using curl as well. And then it's going to show you the data that we got back from our API server, and we can see that we got a 201 response code. And so I want you guys to just kind of play around with this, get familiar with it. So there's going to be times where you may not even have to use a tool like Postman. You could just test things out using Swagger UI and the built-in documentation. And what's even nicer about this is that we have built-in support for two different types of documentation. So this is using Swagger UI, but if you use Redocs, sorry, there shouldn't be an S at the end, it's just Redoc. Right, you could see a different format of the documentation using a tool called Redoc. So it's going to fundamentally do the same thing. It's just a different documentation tool. So it's going to look a little different. Feel free to use whichever one you ultimately prefer. But by having it automatically get generated by Fast API, you don't ever have to worry about updating anything. So if you take a look at like create post, right, we've defined the pieces of data that we need. And in the future, if we decide that the user needs to pass in another field, maybe like the date that they want it to get published, it'll automatically update this. You don't have to tell it. You don't have to manually go in and update it yourself.